שקר אישנו במצוותם. וציוונו לעסוק בדברי תורה. לעסוק בדברי תורה, לעסוק בדברי תורה. לעסוק בדברי תורה, לעסוק בדברי תורה. Okay, I don't think I can do anything sitting down. So, the handout that you have in your hand was originally, the genesis of it was I was asked to create a policy paper for presidential candidate in 2016 on the Jewish take on abortion. So I spent a couple months and became an expert on Jewish law. From that, it was developed and I expanded it for different people and has been reviewed by the top conservative and Orthodox rabbis in the country. So when I say that this is the Jewish perspective on abortion, I'm not exaggerating. Okay, now you're going to see that the Jewish perspective on abortion doesn't necessarily only mean one thing, though. Okay, it's important to understand why we're doing this. Roe v. Wade may be reversed, and it may come out tomorrow, for all we know, because I think the Supreme Court things generally come out on Mondays, decisions, and this is one way or the other a big topic. When we look at the issue of abortion, we've all been brought up, because all of us have been brought up in the last 60 years, that we're looking at the issue from the perspective of pro-life versus pro-choice. What does that mean? That means that pro-life believes that there is a soul, that there's a fetus, and that's the value and the priority, and pro-choice is that has no value, it is only the mother that has value. Neither are accurate from a Jewish perspective. So we're going to study, we're going to go over some of this stuff. These are for you to take home, this handout, so that you can look at it, question it, and explore it. One of the things that those of you who have taken classes before, you know that I'm very, very big on citing things. So you'll see, as you go through this, you'll see tons of footnotes. I think there should be, unless they didn't print out, that would be really a problem. No, there's footnotes, right? Yeah, there we go. So, and those footnotes are so when someone says, no, it doesn't say that, or they say, I don't know where that came from, or how come I never learned that, your answer is the same answer I give when someone says, how come I never heard that before, which is, it's not my fault, there's a source. Okay? The rabbi didn't pull it out of his tochas, this is actually what the source is. Okay, so we're going to go through some of this. I'll go through, and then we'll also go around as we always do. The most important, or not one of the most important, one of the important pieces is that we need to understand the concept elu ve'elu. These words and these words are both words of the living God. It's a concept in Judaism. Nowhere is that more clearly illustrated than in the story of Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan. You'll find the end of it on page 2. So what happens here? Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan are two very dear friends. They're actually brother-in-laws. And they go through their journey throughout the Talmud, and they have dialogue, and they're always fighting each other. And then what happens? And let's read this for a minute. Reish Lakish dies, and Rabbi Yochanan is very, very upset. He's miserable. And so the other rabbis send another rabbi to go comfort Yochanan. And they say, Rabbi Eliezer, he's really knowledgeable, and so we're going to send him. So Eliezer goes to Yochanan, and Yochanan would make a statement, and Eliezer would agree with it. He'd say, you're right. And Yochanan would make another statement, and Eliezer would say, you're right. And Yochanan, anyone named Yochanan should be paying attention. And Yochanan would make a statement, and Eliezer would say, you're right. And Yochanan says, what do I need you to tell me I'm right? I know I'm right. With Reish Lakish, Bar Lakisha, he says, I would pose 24 questions, he would pose 24 other questions, together we'd start to have a dialogue that would help us to understand the infinite. We want people who disagree with us. That's a Jewish attitude. I remember that when I was teaching at Loyola Marymount, Rabbi Arthur Gross Schaefer and I would have he's a witness on my ketubah, for God's sake. It's a man I love very, very much. We would have knockdown, drag-out yelling matches about what was best for the Jewish kids. And the priest would look at us and think that we must hate each other. But in fact, we were arguing for the sake of heaven. Okay, so it's really important, as Yochanan teaches us, that we respect other people's opinions. It's really, really important. So let's go through a little bit of this. The first piece about this, we are obligated to create, right? So it is the primary command that is given by God. to be fruitful and to multiply. It is not the first command to be given to humans, but we agree that it is a blessing that's analogous to the blessing of animals. We are to be fruitful, multiply, and replenish the earth. It's found in Genesis 9:1. And this is a very specific comment. We actually say this commandment is so important that we are taught that to not have children is as if you have committed murder, and as if you have diminished the divine image. And that's from Masechta Yevamot, from the Babylonian Talmud. Okay? So if you are a man, and by the way, this is a command given to men, not to women. We do not command women to have children, because that would be potentially putting a woman's life at risk, and that would not be good. Okay? What we do have that command is upon men. And we are commanded to have children. If you do not, you are considered as if you have committed murder. That's how serious this command of being fruitful and multiply is. Okay? Moreover, it's taught that when we get to heaven, when we brought to judgment, you're going to be asked a question. Did you deal fairly in commerce? Did you have a fixed time for learning the sacred texts of your religion, studying Talmud and Torah? Did you undertake to fulfill the duty of procreation? And that's from Masechta Shabbat as well. So we are obligated as men to have children. Women are not. Okay, but it is that important, and it is equivalency of murder if we do not. All right? I want you to understand something else, however. In Judaism, sex is not just for procreation. Sex is for pleasure. And there are many, many excerpts and classes or teachings on how you're supposed to have intimate relations. I have the dialogue with grooms. I just did a wedding last night, and right before the wedding, I take the groom aside and I tell him about the birds and the bees from a Jewish perspective. Now you think this is all very funny, but I guarantee you every time the groom learns something new. Our texts are very, very detailed. I do not teach this class. Some of you have been in the class when I've taught it for men. I do it about every year and a half or so. I will not teach this class to women because it's just not appropriate. Okay, but typically the women are really happy because the guys come home frisky. So it's really, but it's very, very intimate. So you cannot say in any way, shape, or form that procreation as opposed to pleasure, that this affects the argument about abortion. Does that make sense to everybody? Now, what are we talking about when we're talking about abortion? Abortion is when there is a fetus of some sort. There is the spark of life. All right, and that is what it's there. All right, so let's go about the legal status of the fetus. This is incredibly important. Okay. In Catholic theology and much Christian theology, the idea of pro-life is that at the moment of conception, there is a soul there. Right? Does that make sense to everyone? So let's look a little bit to talk about this. So who would like to turn to page 4 and read the first paragraph or two very loudly? Where it says legal status of the fetus.
So the traditional set of laws regarding abortion begin with the legal status of the fetus. The Talmud has a clear phrase. The fetus is regarded as one of the limbs, also translated as thigh of the mother.
This is so important. This is from Gittin 23b, where it says very specifically that the fetus is the thigh of the mother. Okay? Sometimes translated as lip. It's translated both ways. All right? That is how it is viewed. Please continue, Rita.
This becomes a primary piece of text for understanding Jewish law regarding abortion, and so must be explained a bit.
Because that's a pretty big statement, isn't it? Okay? The point blank, the fetus, and this is Talmud, which is oral Torah, that the fetus is a part of the mother, just like her thigh. Okay? We base this on law that is in the Torah. So let's back up just a little bit. There's the written Torah. That's the 5 books that you all know intimately, study every day, etc. I know you all do. No? Not yet. So, and then there is the oral Torah. And think of it this way. okay? Think of the Talmud this way. The Talmud is composed of the Mishnah and Gemara, the two aspects of it. That God says to Moses, write down you shall protect the Sabbath, and Moses writes down you shall protect the Sabbath. Moses says, God, what's that mean? And God says, do this, don't do this, do this, don't do this. Moses then passes it to Joshua. He then shares it with the elders and the prophets and the men of the Great Assembly. And ultimately, Rabbi Judah Hanasi writes down this oral Torah. But then we have an issue, okay, because it's an oral tradition. Rabbi Allen comes to the court and he says, may I move a cup of coffee on Shabbat if it's more than halfway full? Okay? And now, so Rabbi Allen comes and asks that. And so Rabbi Stan says, I was taught by my grandfather, who was taught by his grandfather, who was taught by his grandfather, who was taught by Joshua, who was taught by Moses, that yes, you can. Okay? And Rabbi Mark says, well, I was taught by my grandfather, who was taught by his grandfather, who was taught by his grandfather, who was taught by Joshua, who was taught by Moses. You cannot. And then the men of the assembly, the 71 men of the Great Assembly, the Sanhedrin, they argue about it. Okay? It's called machlokas. And they argue about it. And ultimately, they side with Rabbi Stan, or they side with Rabbi Mark. Or they say, my favorite line, teku, which means we have no idea, the Messiah will tell us when he shows up. Which is extremely frustrating the first time you get a teku after you've been studying for weeks on this thing. It's very frustrating. But those are the answers, okay? And we have a minority opinion, we have a majority opinion, and that's where our law comes from, okay? That's really what Talmud is. But it's always based in law. So when we make a comment of a fetus is to be treated as a woman's thigh, that's how we view it. Where's that stemming from in the Torah? And it's stemming from a number of different places, okay? So one of the places it's stemming from is the idea that if a pregnant woman is hurt by a man and she dies, that's a capital crime. If anyone is killed, is murdered, that's a capital crime, punishable by death in theory, right? Everyone with that? But if a pregnant woman is hurt by a man, she lives, but she loses her pregnancy, it is considered a tort crime. This is in the Torah. And you can look at the cites, the citations are all in there. But so the idea is that clearly it's a tort crime, punishable by finances, not a capital crime, which is what you punish death. Make sense? That leads our sages to recognize, wait a minute, we don't view the fetus on the same level as other things. Moreover, you cannot mourn a fetus. The laws of mourning, saying Kaddish, Shiva, Shloshim, you're not supposed to do for a fetus. The laws against a fetus dying are different than infanticide, a child who's already alive, or homicide. A child cannot, a fetus cannot have rights of acquisition. Okay, you cannot, other than from the father, no one else can give a gift to a fetus. It cannot acquire. This is why traditionally we don't have baby showers. Okay, because the fetus can't own anything. So if you're going to have a baby shower, give money to the mother. She can use it anyhow. All right? So this is the intention of that. So we know that the Torah does not treat the fetus in the same way. Moreover, let's say that I was going to come to Stephanie and say, I'm going to buy your cow. And I bought her cow for $200, which, by the way, you overcharged me for. And I brought the cow home. And then we found out the cow was pregnant. She didn't know. When the cow gives birth to a baby calf, who owns the calf? I do, right? Do I have to give her more money?
No.
No. What about conversion? So a woman is not Jewish. She's pregnant. She goes through conversion, goes through the mikvah. Does the baby need to go through conversion? No. Right? So this all leads us to understand that the fetus is a thigh or a limb of the mother. You guys see where that logic is? All right? Since it is so these are all different, and again, this is all cited in here, but I think it's easier to just do this. And again, the quotes are here, and injuring a fetus is clearly criminal. But abortion, that would mean, is criminal without basing the argument on anything to do with the fetus's rights. Okay? It is not, because we have a whole other issue here. On the one hand, while we cannot, it's not a capital crime, it is a criminal act, right, for a fetus to die. We know that from the book of Exodus. If a pregnant mother is hurt, it's a capital, or it's a tort crime. And the basis of this is something called diminishing the divine image. You don't get to diminish the divine image. All right? The law is that we are an image of God, and you don't get to the reason a woman who's pregnant and loses the baby because someone hits her, the reason that woman, or that's a tort crime, is because we have diminished her divine image. Similarly, if God forbid I cut off a woman's thigh or a man's thigh, that would be a crime, wouldn't it? Right?
Yeah.
Same way. Why is it a crime? It's diminishing the divine image. That's the phrase that is used. Everyone with me on this? Go ahead, Rita. Go on. Ask the question.
No, I feel my somenos. I'm not understanding about
Okay, so why is it that we can't, why is it clear that even though it's a part of the woman's thigh,
Right.
if you cut it off, it's still a crime? It's not a capital crime. It's a tort crime, punishable by fines. Right? Okay, does that make sense?
Got that.
Why? The same way that if you went and a man, God forbid, went to another man or woman and cut off his thigh or her arm, that would be a tort crime, wouldn't it? And the reason it's a crime is because the phrase, it diminishes the divine image. Okay? By the way, did you understand? Let me just, Alan, can I bother? Yes. Go ahead.
Quick question. Is there a distinction when you intentionally...
Loudly.
Oh, is there a distinction in which intentionally you try specifically just to hurt the fetus versus...
We're going to get to that.
Okay.
We're going to get. Can I borrow you for a second? When we talk about the divine image, by the way, you've all, sit right here, make it look like a big show. There you go. Of course, that means I'm Vanna White, so be careful. So arms down. Behold the divine image of God. When we say we are made in the image of God, this is what God looks like. Just ask his wife. Okay? Maybe we should do this again. But it doesn't understand why, because if you think about the four-letter name of God, Yud, Hey, Vav, and Hey, instead of writing it horizontally, we write it vertically. You see there's a Yud, there's a Hey, his torso is a Vav, and his legs are a Hey. Do you all see that? Do you know Hebrew?
Yeah.
So, if we, God forbid, cut an arm off, it wouldn't be a Hey anymore, would it?
No.
Okay, thank you. So, and that's why we say, on that day, God will be one and his name will be one. So, is the idea of a unified body. So, does that everyone following that a little bit? All right. So it's a tort crime, and it's a crime because it diminishes the divine image. Yes.
Can I just clarify something for myself? So, and I'm not a lawyer, but my understanding in English law, in our law, in American law, there's civil and criminal law.
Correct.
And
Tort.
well, yeah, civil, tort law, and criminal law.
Right.
And there are crimes, like cutting off somebody's leg would be assault or whatever it would be. That wouldn't be a crime, it just wouldn't be a capital crime.
So we have crimes that are punishable by death
Yeah.
or punishable by fines
Okay.
or excommunication
That's a clear thing.
yes, that's just included.
The other question I had was, so all those other laws that you were talking about that led to the notion that the fetus has a different status of person, those are also talmudic, right? And that's oral tradition.
No, they actually come from Torah.
Okay.
Okay, in the Torah it specifically says, in the handout I've got the citations on
Okay.
it, but I believe Exodus 21, I'd have to look. But it actually says that if a woman, in fact, I think I quoted her, if a woman is hurt and killed, then, let me see if I have it here. It has no rights. Some here,
I know things like you mentioned conversion, that you mentioned, those things are,
conversion is a Talmudic law, but it actually says that in Exodus 21:22, okay, it actually talks about the issue that if a woman is killed, it's punishable by death. If the fetus is killed, it's punishable by fines. Okay, this is in the same phrase where it talks about eye for eye, tooth for tooth, that kind of stuff. All right, everyone with me? Okay. Now, if we look at the classic pro-life versus pro-choice argument, we're going to get there. If we don't get there by the end, you'll tell me and we'll come back. All right, deal? All right, if you look at the classic pro-life versus pro-choice argument, you have this concept of pro-life being based on the life of the fetus. Right? That's why it's called pro-life. and the idea of ensoulment. So we have this concept in Judaism that is called secrets of God. There are some things that are unknown. There are some things that are unknowable. Right? It is unknowable to know when a soul is fully detached from its body after death. The rabbis have the discussion that the soul is detached from the body upon the moment of death. They have the discussion of 3 days, which is why one of the reasons they say you gotta bury. They have the discussion that the soul is still connected to the body all the way up until the casket is closed. All the way up until the casket is closed and the earth is placed on. All the way until the casket is closed, the earth is placed on and it's filled. The rabbis have all these different, and they base their arguments on everything, and they say all these things, but then they make clear, we don't base our law on that which is unknowable. Right? Similarly, the rabbis have these wonderful discussions. At what point does a soul enter a fetus? And some of the rabbis say at the moment of conception. Some even say at the moment where the couple has decided to conceive and they love each other. Some say at 30 days, some say at 40 days. Some say not until full birth. Do we base law on what we cannot know? No, that's not the Jewish way. So although there's this whole detailed argument and debate about when does the soul come, and it's an intellectual debate. It's kind of like arguing how many angels can dance on the head of a pin. Okay, it's a great intellectual exercise, means absolutely nothing. We do not base the law on what cannot be known. Here's what we do know. At 36 weeks, they even identified that 2,000 years ago. A child is fully formed, and it can live on its own. All right? We know that when the head or the crown of the baby is revealed, or the greater part of the body is revealed, then it could potentially live on its own. So we say, at that point, we're pretty confident saying there's a soul, once either the crown has been revealed, or the greater part of the body, or at 36 weeks. Everyone following? Because even in the farthest case, the rabbis accepted that there's a truth to that. Everyone with me? Okay. So now we're saying that we're going to base our law upon the idea that it's all about the woman's rights, all about her, not about the fetus, up until the moment of 36 weeks or when the crown or greater part of the body is revealed. Everyone with me on this? Okay. Seems fair. We don't base law on what we do not know. By the way, just to understand, although it's accepted Christian and Catholic theology that the soul is part of the fetus, how many of you have heard of that? Right, upon conception? Yeah, that is for the last 1,500 years, give or take. That theory does not come around until the 4th century, and even through the 6th century, the argument is made that that concept of ensoulment, that's what that phrase is called, is not part of Catholic or Christian theology, even until the 6th century. Okay, what we're studying, when you talk to a Christian about this, you can say what we're studying right here is all predates Jesus. So this is what he would have learned or known. The church changes in the 4th through 6th centuries to the point of saying ensoulment happens at conception. There's a lot of reasons for that, but we don't base our law on this. So if it is a limb of the mother, right, all the way up until crown is revealed or 36 weeks, this means that whose choice is it about abortion? It's mom's. Anybody else's choice? No. Now you would think that this may say at first that it leads us to believe you can have an abortion all the way to 35 and a half weeks, right? Except remember, what did we just talk about with Alan? You're not allowed to diminish the divine image. So a man goes to a doctor and says, his hand is, or his arm is gangrenous, God forbid, and the doctor cuts off the arm, right? Is that allowed?
Of course.
Yeah.
Because it's a threat to the man's life. A man goes to the doctor and says, I don't like the way my arm looks anymore, cut it off. Is that allowed?
No.
No, it'd be malpractice, wouldn't it? Okay, so you're not allowed to just defame yourself. Remember, we don't pierce, we don't tattoo. Right? So you're not allowed to just defame and diminish the divine image. And we get to something now that's a legal term in Judaism called a rodef. A rodef. A rodef is a pursuer with the intention of killing. So it's talked about the idea that a rodef is if you see someone pursuing someone else with a knife with the intention of killing them, it is your obligation to stop them. All right? That's called a rodef. It's a legal definition of someone who is pursuing with the intention to physically kill. Right? And if something is a rodef, it should be stopped. If the man comes to the doctor and he's got a gangrenous arm that is pursuing him to kill him, it's called a rodef. And the arm can be amputated and should be. Similarly, we have this concept that the rabbis talk about with abortion and a fetus. If the fetus is a rodef, it's going to kill the mother. Then, do you think it's allowed to have an abortion?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Would be, wouldn't it? Okay. How far could you do that, do you think? Right up until 36 weeks. Okay. So on the one hand, you can't in Judaism, because you can't diminish the divine image, you can't have an abortion on day one. On the other hand, if it's a rodef, you could have abortion at 35 and a half weeks.
At what point is it a rodef?
If it is threatening the physical life
Okay.
of the mother. Remember, the image of a rodef is a person pursuing someone else with a knife with the intention to kill them. Okay? So if it's a rodef, you are absolutely allowed to abort all the way up to 36 or until the crown comes out. At that moment of 36 weeks or when the crown of the head is revealed, now the rabbis say, how do we know the rodef, or how do we know the baby is a rodef to the mother, as opposed to how do we know the mother's not a rodef to the baby? And we don't trade one life for another life. We don't do that. That's against our theology. So this concept of a rodef becomes the idea of if the fetus is threatening the mother's life, then you can abort all the way up to 35 and a half, all the way to 36 weeks, or when the crown has been revealed. And if not, you are prohibited from abortion because you can't diminish the divine image. So our argument has now changed from the classic argument of pro-life versus pro-choice to an argument of it's all about the women's rights. I don't want to hear about the fetus rights. I could care less about the fetus rights. It's a secret of God that's unknowable. But with rights come responsibilities. It's not just the right. You don't get to abort because it's inconvenient. Okay? As a post form of birth control. By the way, the Talmud has a lot of detail about birth control, both before having sex and even a day after tea. All right? Talmud doesn't, because remember, sex is also for pleasure. So in Judaism, so we don't say, you can't have pleasure. So the rabbis there are recipes for birth control. There are things to do. There are specific prophylactics that are talked about in the Talmud. All right? We don't do abortion as a form of birth control because it's not a rodef. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay, so now let's look at something a little bit else. The rabbis argue repeatedly about the influence and importance of mental health. All right? We know mental health. Yes, go ahead.
This is a rodef question, kind of from the side.
Loudly, so they can.
What happens if you know that something is wrong with the baby? Like
It's not
if-
rodef.
That's what I want to know.
It's not rodef. Okay? Something's wrong with the arm.
Well, you were talking about
Right.
the gangrene arm, and then you
It-
can cut it off?
So because it's gangrenous, that's going to just spread and kill the mother or kill the person, right? But if it's just really ugly or withered, then can you do that? No. And if any of us walked into a doctor's office and said to the doctor, this guy over here, his arm doesn't work right, are you going to cut it off? If the doctor said yes, you'd sue him for malpractice, wouldn't you? Okay? It has to be a rodef. Now we get to something else that the rabbis recognized, even 2,000 years ago, that we recognize today, which is the fact that mental and psychological and emotional and spiritual aspects of ourselves also influence our physicality, right? For better or for worse. Our mindset affects our physical world, right? In a lot of ways. What if physically it's not going to kill someone, but psycho-emotionally it will lead to their physical death? Not interested in whether it's going to cause them inconvenience, problems, or challenges. The question is it going to lead to their physical death? A rodef is not someone who's yelling you dirty SOB. A rodef is with the intention to kill. With me, guys? All right. So let's use that example of the guy with the arm. Okay? His cousin comes in to the doctor's office, and his cousin comes in, and his cousin's hand is, 2 of the fingers are mangled, 2 of them are paralyzed, and that's his hand. And he says to the doctor, and the doctor says, you're going to be fine, there's no infection, you're just not going to be able to use your hand, it's withered. And he says to the doctor, tells the doctor to cut off his hand. Should the doctor do it?
No.
Why?
Because
It's not a rodef.
It's not a rodef, it's not pursuing his life. Now let me ask you a different question. And the doctor says, look, I'm not cutting off your hand. That would be irresponsible malpractice. But then the man says to the doctor, no, you don't understand. He says he's the world's greatest violist. And if he looks at that hand, if he's forced to look at that hand, it will cause him such depression that he will kill himself. Is it possible that it would be okay for that doctor to cut off that hand?
Yes.
Yes.
It is potential, right? But you have to determine, is he really going to kill himself? Who's supposed to determine that? The doctor? The surgeon?
Oh, it's an unknowable.
It's not. No, it's not. It's someone's got to determine whether this is a threat to his physical life. It's going to kill him.
So who would determine that?
A Beit Din.
That's what I'm trying
A Beit Din. Court of rabbis. Who are looking at the idea of his ethical and psychological state, and they're looking at it and saying, you know what? This guy's going to kill himself. This is going to kill his physical life. It's not about an inconvenience. It's about it actually is going to lead to death. So it is a pursuer with the knife. God forbid a 13-year-old girl is raped and gets pregnant. And she wants to abort. And is she allowed to?
No.
It's not a rodef. Unless it is rodef because she's so young. But it's realized that as she watches, forget about the birth of the baby, as she watches her belly get big, she is going to kill herself. Okay? Then would it potentially be allowed?
Yes.
Excuse me?
How do you determine
That's-
whether she's going? She could say, if I'm not allowed to, I'll kill myself. But you can't.
Welcome to the challenges of being on a real Beit Din.
Right? You can't really know.
Welcome to the challenges on a real Beit Din. How do you know when someone comes to the Beit Din and says, I'm converting to Judaism, and I've accepted God, and I've rejected Jesus, and all that kind of stuff? How does the Beit Din know? We do the best we can. Okay, go on.
You know, the other thing is that you can.
Loudly.
You give that power to the bed dean, under which, what give them any skills or knowledge, or, how would you know who's in that bed dean? It could be an extreme orthodox that for them.
Remember, in theory, this is all in theory. Okay, in theory, these rabbis would be wise enough. Okay, now, but we're going to take it past that, because the extension of the Beit Din becomes what are called tshuva. Tshuva is a responsa. We have tshuvot, which are legal responses that are given periodically that people will write that are accepted by the different movements. Okay, because we now have Reform and Conservative and Orthodox, and all sorts of things. But let me back up a little bit on Jewish law so everyone's on the same page. In the book of Deuteronomy, Parsha Shoftim, it says you shall go to the judge of your time and do what he says, east or west, left or right. Rashi understands this explains this, that if he says that that's north, it's now north. If he says it's south, it's now south. Because everything is in relationship. From that, we get to the issue of, and through Talmud, that it becomes rabbinic law. Rabbis dialogue about things, and they make that into law. Then we start making more tshuvot, but because you're allowed to interpret, right? Everyone's allowed to interpret. But a rabbi in an area where there's a plague is going on in Yom Kippur, and he says, you know what? Everyone's allowed to eat, because I don't want anyone dying. 2 years ago, we're doing high holiday services outdoors, right? For the first time since my bar mitzvah, I'm drinking liquid. I made sure you all knew you can drink liquid. It's 100 degrees outside. And we did it to keep safe because of the pandemic. But we're outside, it's 100 degrees. Drink liquid, don't be an idiot. Okay? I would not have said drink liquid as we're sitting in the Canyon Club nice and comfy. Make sense? So we go, that's the idea of what a Rav is, what a judge is supposed, shofet is supposed to be. Now, we have responses that are interpretations of the law. And certainly, I'll use the pandemic as an example because it's on everyone's consciousness because of its recent issue. The conservative movement in January of 2021 had an official responsa where their understanding of the law was it is mandatory to wear masks and be vaccinated. Actually, I'm sure it was vaccinated, I think it was mandatory, masks as well. There was mandatory vaccinations. And there was all this long explained legal argument because when you give a legal brief, you're giving a legal brief, just like any other brief, about why. And it was unanimously adopted by the board of the Rabbinic Assembly 13-0. Okay? Now the response is based on the person who wrote it, and he wrote it saying 100% of doctors believe you should have mandatory vaccinations. Now that wasn't true then, and it's certainly not true now. But based on that, he gave the response that we should all have mandatory vaccinations, and the conservative movement said we should have mandatory vaccinations. Okay? So whether we like it or not, the different movements will have their different takes on it. Okay? And someone may say incest or rape would be a case for it. Make sense? It is not a perfect science. The great thing about pregnancy, though, is one way or the other, it's done in 9 months.
And for the rest of your life, so it's, you know.
It's done. The pregnancy is done. Remember, this is not a discussion about what to do with the baby. This is not saying that the person needs to hold on to the baby. This is saying, is it a rodef? Yeah.
Just curious, since we're comparing it to other things, and want to start a whole different discussion, but is this the same take for Jewish philosophy on transgenderism?
No.
Okay.
No.
Another time we'll discuss it. Thank you.
No. We talked about transgenderism in a class 2 months ago.
Okay.
Yeah. Just so you know, there's 2 genders in Judaism. There's male and there's female. And then there's a category called a tom-tom, which is not a belly, but a tom-tom, which is because of genitals being deformed or defaced or specifically hidden in whatever way. It's not clear if it's male or female.
Right.
Into that category also goes hermaphrodites. And the laws around the tom-tom is that they must live by the most stringent laws of both sexes until they can step up into one or the other. Okay. So no, it's a whole different argument. It's a whole different. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
It's already more than I wanted to talk about transgenderism on video today.
It was just all of the stuff I'm comparing with the limbs and the body, the divine image.
There's a similarity with some of that stuff, but we're going to stick on this issue.
Thank
So
you.
if it's a rodef, you can kill it. The fetus can be killed because it's a pursuer. Once it's 36 weeks, once it's the crown of the head or the greater part of the body has been revealed, you cannot. Everyone's with me on that. Does everyone see how that's a really logical system? Not based on a hypothesis of when does ensoulment happen. It takes there are arguments where you cannot have a major premise that you share. One of the concepts in debate or rhetoric is that you want to have a major premise. Because if you have a similar major premise, you can have a dialogue. If there is a chasm, you can't. There is a chasm between the pro-life person who says the fetus at conception has a soul and the pro-choice person who says there's no soul there. That's a chasm that cannot be crossed. Remember, in Judaism, the goal of war is not victory, it is peace. The goal of dialogue is not victory, it is peace. You cannot have peace between the person who thinks there's a soul in a conception and the person who thinks there's no soul there at all. It's a chasm that can't be crossed, which is more important than women's rights and the fetus rights. We take that off the table. Do you see how smart this is? We take this entirely off the table. We don't add the fetus rights into the dialogue at all. It's all about the woman's rights. And with rights come responsibilities. You don't get to deface it. There's clearly a potential for life. Even if you don't believe there's a soul, there's clearly a spark of something there, right? You don't get to just deface it because it's inconvenient.
Well, why do the rabbis get to decide, in that same vein of it being the woman's rights, albeit with the responsibilities, if she's mentally in a state where she feels like she could kill herself, you know, that my life is so bad.
So Ken, that's a
Why
dilemma.
isn't she in a better position to make that decision?
Well, first of all, we got to make halakha means a way of going, right? And hopefully she can. But let's be honest. Let's just be very honest. There are people getting abortions because it's birth control post-act. So when the woman says, if the law is, as long as the woman says she's going to kill herself or is going to kill her, short-term or long-term, then she can have an abortion. And the woman says, oh, I'm going to kill myself if you don't. And we know it's not true. It's similar to the same thing of how do you know someone comes to a beit din for conversion that they really are committed to Judaism? You don't. We can't. We can ask questions and try and have insight, but we can't. This is just to give halakha. Halakha comes from the Hebrew word lolechet, meaning a way of it, which means to go. Halakha is a way of going. Okay, it's not the kind of dictate. There was a great rabbi who said to a bunch of rabbinic students, when a woman comes before you with a chicken, she asks you if the chicken is kosher. Look at the woman before you look at the chicken. Because if she can't afford another chicken, you better know the law well enough to make that chicken kosher.
It's just serious. I'm not advocating one way or the other. I'm just thinking that it's interesting that even in the Jewish tradition that you run up against that fundamental notion of do a bunch of old men get to make
Thanks, Ken.
a woman who has to make a decision about her own body, even there.
But this is about having a protection, or having a protection. Remember, if someone does kill a fetus, is it a capital crime?
No.
No. Okay? This is a guideline. We need women to understand that, and by the way, pregnancy affects men very deeply, not in the same way, but it does affect men very, very deeply. If you, as a woman, don't realize that, let me tell you it does. And there's all sorts of studies on that. Not in the same way, and we certainly don't have to pass a watermelon through the eye of a needle, so it's a lot easier on us. But the point is that we're giving guidelines. You shouldn't get an abortion unless it is a threat to the life. Now, where you get into the dialogue is what is a threat, okay? And so over here you got the ultra-Orthodox guy who says, unless it's physically killing her, it's not a threat. She can't have an abortion, okay? And over here you got the far left secularist reform rabbi who says, well, it's an inconvenience and that's going to affect her life, which is ultimately going to kill her long term because she's not going to be as happy, so her life will be affected. Therefore, abortion is allowed.
And yet there is one person who knows.
No, you just made an assumption that's not true. You just made an assumption that is not true. You made the assumption you're saying there's one person who knows. Do not for a moment.
It's about whether or not she could kill herself.
No, there isn't. Especially if you're looking at it long term. No, there isn't. There's no one who can really know, right? So we have this guideline, including her.
That's right.
Right? My wife was on bed rest for 10 weeks. Now, you all know, yeah, she will swear I only fed her waffles and pancakes. I want to make something clear that she does not remember I was doing 5 meals a day and they were different. She will swear that that's not the case. And as a result, she gained over 100 pounds. She could not have fit in my sweatpants. Okay? This was twins, right? In that moment, she might have thought all sorts of things. I don't know. I mean, literally, her back would be against my chest. I couldn't, do you remember that picture? I couldn't get my hands around her. Okay? I'm just putting this in perspective, okay? God knows what she was thinking in that moment, in certain moments, right? So don't make an assumption that someone knows what's going on inside them so well. Do you see my point?
Yeah, I do.
So we have guidelines, we have law, and the guidelines are, if it's a physical threat to the life that's betrothed, you can have abortion, and if it's not, you can't. No,
Listen, is it okay if I challenge a little bit the discussion?
of course it is.
You know, the difficulty I'm having with that is that,
Loudly though, Peter.
yeah, at the end of the day, you have the pro-life, right, and the pro-choice. The Judaism say, no, the fetus has no right, however, you don't get to decide if you want to keep it or not, no matter what, almost.
No, if
I
it's
mean,
a
it's
threat,
never
if it's a
decided.
threat,
But she doesn't decide that. You know, somebody
no,
else.
well, first of all, I don't think a woman, typically, I don't think the mother is intellectually capable of knowing her own physical health in terms of if it's a threat, what's going on inside. I mean, we need doctors. We need doctors.
She's like a 30 years old raped.
Wait, we need doctors is my point, so in terms of whether something's erroneous. Okay, we can all agree on that none of us are our best doctors. Can we all agree on that statement? We need doctors who are gonna say, this is a threat, this is not a threat. Okay, so that's the one that's off the table. Does anyone think that mother should be the one who determines medically whether the baby's a threat or not?
Well, I think she should decide whether she wants to keep, I mean, yeah, okay, but that's an opinion, but if something, I would have a psychiatrist evaluator, not a rabbi. for
We used
example.
to be the psychiatrists.
Yes.
Okay, and in today's world, what I'm talking about is mood.
Yeah.
Okay, it's totally moot. It's not, no one's going to a Beit Din, I don't think, on this issue. And that's not, and here's what's happening, and this is one of the things that happens because of passions. Our argument is clear. This is a story, I tell it all the time. Rabbi goes into a village, there's all these bullseyes with an arrow, says, who did it? They say, it's Shmuley the 9-year-old. He goes to Shmuley, did you really do these bullseyes? He says, yes. He goes, how'd you get so good? He says, it's easy, I shoot an arrow and then I draw a target around it. Okay? That is what we do with passionate issues. There are a bunch of rabbis out there right now who are saying abortion is allowed per Jewish law. They're full of it. They've decided they want to make it permissible to have abortion in any way, including as a form of birth control. It's an inconvenience. And so they want to have it, in some cases, even past birth. Even past birth. Now, I don't really care what they say. The law is clear. That's not okay, is it? Hold on a second. That's not okay. But they've decided this is their target and this is their arrow. They're going to draw a target around it. That's what happens with passionate issues. Judaism and our form of a machlokas, of a debate, tries to take that off the table. We try to take off that drawing a target around the arrow and rather kind of look at what's the real dialogue. So that person, look, if someone's going to determine what's a physical threat to a mother, I think the OBGYN is probably the most qualified person. Can we agree on that one? Do you think so?
Well, to poke the hole in that argument that medical doctors know what they're doing is the vaccination.
That's a different, no it's not, that's a different issue. In Judaism, the whole vaccination issue is an entirely different issue. It is not based on this at all. So would you disagree that you think there's anyone better than an OBGYN to know whether a fetus is dangerous to a mother? It's a very specific question.
It depends which OBGYN you're talking about.
Okay, then find an OBGYN, whatever your OBGYN is, whoever someone's decided, they know, that's their choice for a doctor. You can't argue the fact that that is the most qualified person to understand the body. It is the most qualified person. The vaccines are an entirely different argument and issue. Entirely separate.
Well, it's not different in the sense that you believe that person, like we talk about, a lot of people talk about the medical, the allopathic medical system is like our God. It's been our God for a long time, and that's why we're in this situation now.
But I'm going to interject this because I don't want to go off on the vaccines, so I'm going to stop you here. Okay? It is an entirely different argument from a Jewish perspective. Being one of the few rabbis in the country who is actually helping people with this, I am telling you point blank, it's an entirely different argument in terms of why you can or cannot be vaccinated. It's an entirely different Jewish argument. The issue here is a different issue. The issue here is it a threat to the mother's life? And if the reality is you don't like an allopathic doctor and you use a midwife, then that's your expert who's telling you.
Okay,
Okay?
Yeah.
The point is, I'm not saying you got to use this expert.
okay.
Okay, we're not saying
Okay.
Tony Fauci is the
Right.
is the authority on fetus
Okay, that's my point.
just because he is all of science. We're not saying that.
No, but
Okay.
that, I mean, you know,
But do you see what? So
Yeah,
let's
no,
stay
I
close to
understand,
it.
I understand.
We go to experts because the expert knows better than we do. So you go to a doctor that you believe,
if you believe it, yeah,
okay, it knows better than you do.
yeah.
You go to an OBGYN or a midwife or whomever because you believe they know about what's going on better. Why? Because they've dealt with it hundreds of thousands of times. I not long ago finally got tired of having a pain in my toe that had been on and off for years, so I called Dr. Mark, who's a podiatrist, and I said, should I be concerned about this? And he, in no uncertain terms, said, get your tuchus to a podiatrist and have the toenail, because there's no grown toenail. Now, I didn't have to listen to him, but I'm a schmendrick if I don't, aren't I? Okay? You don't have to listen to me when it comes to a wedding or a funeral, but I guarantee you I have done more of them than everyone in this room combined. Okay, makes sense? So we go to the experts. So your doctor, whomever that medical professional is,
There's a
okay,
difference, yeah.
whomever that is, that person you're going to, if they establish it's a threat to the life, it is. You had a question.
When you mentioned a group of rabbis said that abortion is acceptable in Judaism,
Yeah.
and then so they didn't give like a range, but if the baby is born alive, did they rule on that?
I don't know.
Okay.
Someone sent me a video of a rabbi in the Los Angeles area giving a talk. So one of the challenges is, most of you haven't spent a lot of time studying Talmud or Torah or Tanakh or commentaries on any particular subject. Is that agreed? Okay. And you go to an authority figure of a rabbi based upon the premise that the rabbi knows the material, has explored it, right? You go to a doctor because you go and believe this authority figure knows the material and has explored it, right? So this rabbi gets up and they use this teaching about that it's not a capital crime, which is in the Torah, for a woman, if a fetus is killed and a woman is pregnant, it is not punishable by death, which is part of what we've discussed, right? We talked about. And therefore says, and as a result, we know that since it's not on the same place, we can have abortion whenever we want, and Judaism teaches you can have abortion whenever you want. And this is what that rabbi said. Someone sent me the video. Your granddaughter. Okay? Your daughter sent me the video. And saying, what do you think of this? And I said, this is disgusting. Because it didn't present at all what the Jewish dialogue is or the Jewish perspective. Because the Jewish perspective is not only that the baby is, or the fetus is not, it's considered a woman with a mother. This person probably had never even studied the Talmud and did not even make reference to the fact that it's called a thigh of the mother. It just says, see, this is what Torah says, so you all should know you can do abortions whenever you want. That's just not Jewish. There's a whole discussion. I didn't come up with this idea of a pursuer of a rodef. This is Talmud. Now, our definition of what is a rodef, our definition of is going to mentally destroy someone's life. Our definition of, okay, you know what, it's going to destroy their life because they're 30 and it's an unwanted pregnancy, or they're 22 and it's an unwanted pregnancy and it's going to take them out of law school, and as a result they're not going to become a lawyer, they're going to become a mom, a single mom. They don't want to do that. And so some rabbi says, well, as a result of that, or someone says that's destroying her life, it is a rodef. Someone wants to make that argument. You can make that argument. But to deny that this concept of rodef, this rabbi that I'm referring to, whom I do not know, Okay? Other than seeing this video, I've never seen this rabbi in my life. Junior rabbi at a synagogue. This rabbi was out of their mind. Because they said to a group just like this, Jewish law is, it's only part of the, it's not a capital crime, and you can have abortion. Is that Jewish law?
No.
No.
Would anyone say that's Jewish law when you're actually studying the text? Even if you want to say it's permissible in certain circumstances, and you're deciding what the circumstances are, nowhere would we say, oh, you can just do it because it's inconvenient, would we? And this person had all sorts of thank yous on their website, or on the video, and for the temple. Thank you for telling us the Jewish opinion on abortion. I'm disgusted. I don't think that person's a rabbi. I'm sorry. I'm not saying their name. Because I find it disgusting. Because Judaism is not, as we learned with Yochanan and Reish Lakish, Judaism is not this or that. It's elu ve'elu. These words and these words are both words of the living God. Now you may interpret just like a doctor. One doctor will look at a woman and say that fetus is going to kill you. And one doctor will say, I don't think it is. And you get to decide who's your health professional. Right? One person may look at that withered arm and say, sir, I think it's going to be gangrenous and kill you. And another doctor may look at it and say, I think it's going to be okay if we just give you some antibiotics. Right? One podiatrist may say, just take off, a little bit of the toenail and fix it. And the other one may say, you got to cut the whole foot off. Go to the first one. Right? So that's the point on it. There's place for discussion here, isn't there? Like in most things in Judaism. But you need to know what the discussion is based on. Okay? If you want to make an argument, or you want to make an argument that this is a rodef, this fetus is a rodef, and here's why, okay. But you got to at least make an argument that it's a rodef. Not just it's inconvenient. It's got to be a legitimate argument. So if I was a 30-year-old woman, 25-year-old woman, how's that for a scary image? That's going to haunt Stan for the next 3 days. Because I'd be a really ugly woman, wouldn't I? So if I was a 25-year-old woman and I got pregnant, okay, and I said to you guys are going to decide for me, I really don't want to be pregnant. It's going to screw up my trip that I've got planned to Mexico in July, and I'm also supposed to be going to cruise around the Antarctic in August and September, and morning sickness will ruin that. So I'm going to have an abortion. You all will probably say that's not okay in Jewish law. Agreed?
Agreed.
No, you're not nodding. Yes, agreed?
No, I agree, but I think that, there are situations like that, but most women won't take it that lightly. There are, I'm not saying.
I refuse to make generalizations of most women. It's tough enough to make a generalization of one woman with my wife. I sure as heck am not going to try and do more than that. Okay? So, but we'd all agree that would not be such a good thing, right? Okay? It doesn't make sense. Conversely, if I was a 25-year-old woman and I brought my doctor to you and I said, you guys help me out here. My doctor has said that the fetus is not growing if I let it stay there. It's not growing at its proper rate. If I let it stay there, it's going to cause some sort of infection and I will be dead, God forbid, as this 25-year-old woman. You'd probably be all okay based on Jewish law and having abortion. Right? Does that make sense? So, and then there's everywhere in between, isn't there? Which is why we have elu ve'elu. These words and these words are both words of the living God. But we don't base our argument. Look, Judaism likes to leave lots of opening for dialogue, to deepen relationships, but we don't base our argument on a secret of God. Does that make sense to everyone?
Yeah.
So if we really look at this, and again, you have more sources here than you will need unless you're giving this class yourself. All right? There's something else to add. So we are obligated to observe 613 commandments as Jews. Right? Whether you do or not, that's up to you. There's no mitzvah police. I just want to remind you, it's not a Chinese menu of pick from the column A and column B. And that if someone asks you if you're observing a Jewish law and you're not, that the answer is not no, the answer is not yet. Okay, because God willing, maybe we will. We have 613 laws, but we pose those upon ourselves, not upon other people. Okay, we pose those upon ourselves, not upon other people. There are 7 Noahide laws that are for non-Jews. Okay, that are to be used. And so this is not a process that is necessarily for everybody else, is it? But it's our take on the issue. I think it's a pretty brilliant take. Because it takes that chasm out of the way. And now we're going to discuss, well, is your doctor right? Is my doctor right? We're going to discuss, well, wait, what is really a rodef? What is really pursuing the light? And we're going to have a discussion. But we have a mutual, there's no chasm there that can't be crossed. It becomes a discussion. It may become a passionate argument like our sages of old. But it's not, it's all for the sake of heaven. It's not an uncrossable chasm, which is what we have today in the pro-life versus pro-choice world. Do you guys see the brilliance of this as a result?
If it's not a capital crime, what's the fine?
It says in this right. If I recall correctly, it's determined by the father what the fine would
But
be.
then is it done?
What do you mean is it done?
It's such a passionate issue, you know, so if a woman is left with even the personal decision, she knows that this is not a rodep, but it is going to really mess up her life, and maybe even the baby's life. So she decides to have the abortion. What happens?
Depends on where you are, when you are. Okay, I mean, I don't know that anyone, I would have to look into, I don't know that anyone in Jewish law, there's an example of us enforcing, you know, there's, if you don't keep kosher, you don't get stoned, right? So I think there's other things involved. I'd have to look into what the law is.
Yeah, I asked you this.
Yeah, I actually don't know if she's doing it.
What is the community doing?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that what is or not. I actually don't know what the punishment would be if there is one, if she's choosing to diminish the divine image. I really don't know. I looked into that because it's just not that big of an issue for me. You know, the idea is to try and give the guidelines. Obviously, one thing that we do is called a cherem. Cherem is excommunication. Okay, from the culture, from the tribe.
Yeah, that's kind
And
of what it is.
I don't think that's the case in this, but we do put people in cherem for different reasons, and different Jewish sects or organizations put other people in cherem. There was a rabbi who was put in cherem because he said that you shouldn't get vaccinated, and it was against his movement's law, and so they said you're not me, but someone else was, you're not allowed, got back case. So that does happen. The Rambam was put in cherem though too, at one point. So there are, I actually just don't know the penalty. Okay, I'm sure it can be looked up, and I may even have a source in here, but I'm sure it can be looked up. Exodus 21, I think what it says, I believe, is that it's determined by the father in terms of what the fine is if someone hits the woman. I think, but I'm not 100% sure. We could look it up in Tanakh. But do you see how this argument is much, much cleaner?
I asked it more in the sense of, I asked it more in the sense of how cardinal is. You know, it's like, do you get to still be if you're left with those only 2 choices?
Well, there's lots of choices.
Yeah.
Okay, there's lots of choices. Remember also something else. We talk about abortion. But you're really talking about, when it comes to feticide, the killing of the fetus, you're really talking about a 9-month period. 9-month period. Because a child can be put up for adoption. And there are a lot of people who are looking for children. The treasurer of our synagogue, Sohel, looked for a 1.5 to 2 years before they find their beautiful baby who was born on Rosh Hashanah. Okay? So, you're really kind of not looking at this just as being a mother. If she has to be a single mother, she's got to be a mother, whatever, for the next 40 years. You're really looking at this a little bit differently than that. Okay? And we don't, you know, someone once made the positive, the argument, well, what if the person, the baby who's being aborted is Messiah? Is the Messiah? Right, yeah.
Question. So our country was founded on the Judeo-Christian value.
If you say so.
Okay.
Go on.
No, go out. Then.
No, go ahead. I'll accept that as a major premise for now, for argument's sake. I don't know that it's true, but I will accept that as a major premise.
Okay. Well, then that defeats my argument.
Go on.
I think they hoped to found it in Judeo-Christian.
I'm just gonna, Judy, just go on.
So with that
I'm accepting
said,
your major premise. It doesn't matter.
So
what
how does that relate with the Supreme Court's decision based on the value system and not use that
Okay,
as
so
the
now,
argument as to why the abortion
okay,
is
so
based
you're talking
on
about why is Roe
Jewish
v.
values?
Wade, you're talking about Roe versus
Not
Wade.
necessarily, just in terms of, in generality, why the Supreme
Okay,
Court
so-
wouldn't use
so-
that as a premise of their argument, the Jewish
They
traditional
probably
religious
shouldn't,
act.
to be honest. But Roe v. Wade, and let's just back up for a second, all right, so that everyone is clear. Roe v. Wade did not, back up. If Roe v. Wade is reversed with this case, it's not going to change one of your lives in California. Okay? It's not going to change anyone's. The issue is an issue of federalism versus states' rights.
Right.
Okay? That's the issue.
Giving it
And
back to the states.
that's giving back to the states. The argument to say that it should be a federal law has to do with the rights of women or the rights of the fetus, depending on how you look at it. I could make the argument that a fetus has a soul upon the moment of conception, therefore it should be a federal law that the fetus is protected. I can make that argument, can't I? Based on my major premise that the fetus has a soul. I can make the argument that the fetus has no soul, therefore it should be federal law that a woman can do whatever she wants. That's why I kind of, when you say we're based on a Judeo-Christian, that's why it's not quite so clear when you say it that way.
I understand.
Okay, because Judaism, remember, is both these words and these words are holy. So, but you're talking about an issue of states' rights versus federal rights. You're not, that's a different issue that I want to stay away from because I am not a Supreme Court justice, nor do I have any delusions that I'm going to be asked to be by any of the next presidents in the near future. They look at me and they think I put on a suit and that I'm a biker at a wedding. They don't think I'm, so I think that's not going to be, I'm not really worried about that. Although we have been in a Supreme Court justices chambers, which was pretty cool, wasn't it, guys? It's a little different. That's why when you say it's based on Judeo-Christian values, it is based on a Talmudic model. The
Yes.
model of government is based on a Jewish model of government,
Yes.
based upon both ancient Israel and then how it was lived through 70 That it is. The three branches of government, that kind of stuff is all. So the model is, but I don't want to say it's based on Judeo-Christian values because that's so wide. All right. So does that help everyone understand? So in this summation, let's go through this just in a very simple summation. The right or the obligation to procreate is not upon the women. So you can't say you got pregnant, but that's part of your obligation. Because who's the obligation to procreate on? Us. Right? First of all. We accept multiple opinions. We dialogue. Right? Elu ve'elu, these words and these words. Right? Because it is unknowable, it is a secret of God, we do not base law on those secrets of God. Therefore, we do not base law on when the soul enters the body of the fetus, whether it's a conception or whatever, but we accept that at 36 weeks or when the crown or greater part of the body has been revealed, that it has its own soul. Right? Up until then, it is a thigh of the mother, it is a limb of the mother. Okay? It's in terms very specific in the Talmud. And again, all those sources in your handouts, you can go online. Sefaria, you can just go online, just put in that source and put in English online. Generally, it'll come up from an organization called Sefaria. They'll show you the Hebrew text, they'll show you the English translations. Okay? So you don't have to believe me. Okay? I'm very big on you don't have to believe me. You can look it up. That's why I cite this stuff. I already done the research, you don't have to, but you can look it up to make sure that I did it right. So, it's considered a thigh of the woman, a limb of the mother, right? Therefore, it's all about the woman's rights, but in Judaism, with rights come responsibilities. Excuse me, in the same way that you cannot just amputate an arm because you don't like the way it looks, you can't amputate a thigh because you don't like the way it feels, you can't have an abortion because you don't like what the fetus is doing. Unless the fetus is a rodef, a pursuer, with the intention of killing the physical life. The physical life. So you got to draw, if it's not the physical life that's at risk, then you have to draw a line in your argument that the mental, psychological, emotional is going to affect the physical. Okay? And that line may be that the mother is going to be so depressed she's going to become a drug addict, and long term she's going to kill herself, or she'll die. Not that she'll kill herself, but that she'll die. Right? So you've got to identify, if you want to make the argument that it's something other than just physically dangerous to the mother's life, you got to draw a line in the argument from the mental, emotional status of where she is to her physical death. Because a rodef is about physical death, okay? Up until the fetus is 36 weeks, and the crown of the head or a greater part of the body has been removed or shown, at which point you can't do the abortion anyhow, right? There was a law in Virginia. What was the definition of the law? It was like you could do it was post-birth abortion, basically, right? Is that legal in Judaism?
No.
No. Is there a question about that? No. I'm sorry if you don't like it. There's no question on that one. Okay? We do not sacrifice one life for another life. We don't do that. My friend and teacher, Rabbi Shochet, wrote a wonderful book on that. There was a dialogue about a village being asked to sacrifice one life for the village's life. Okay? We don't sacrifice and trade one for the other. And the Talmudic sages specifically say, at that point, how do we know that it's not the mother pursuing the baby as opposed to the baby pursuing the mother? Okay? So if it's a rodef, y'all are going to keep your term today. If it's a rodef, is it permissible? Yes. If it's not a rodef, is it permissible? No. A rodef is with the intention of physically killing. Can you determine, or is that a place for dialogue? Sure. Is it an honest statement for any rabbi to get up and say, abortion is allowed in Judaism because we clearly don't treat the fetus the way we treat a human being, because if the fetus dies, it's not a capital crime. Is that honest on any rabbi's part? No, that's just a BS lie. I'm sorry. That's a place of either an ignoramus or a liar, or people who have shot their arrow and want to draw a target around it. Do you guys see that? Judaism is much more than that. It's rich in this. Because it's not so black and white, is it? And this is not a black and white issue, is it? But if we take away the fetus rights, and it's only the mother's rights and responsibilities, now that chasm is gone, and we can have real dialogue. So we can respect each other. And maybe you say, you know what, Rabbi, I think that if a woman just doesn't like that she's pregnant, that's a threat to her life. And you say, you know, unless it's physically clearly threatening her life, that's the only way it is. But at least you are on the same page. As much as you may argue with each other, you're not, you don't have that chasm. That cannot be resolved. It cannot be resolved, and we will not be able to resolve the issue if one side thinks that a fetus has a soul and one side says it doesn't. You can't resolve those two. Judaism's smarter, we take it off the table. Do you guys see that? It's not a simplistic argument, it's a much more full and detailed argument. It's much more full and detailed piece. And it's something that needs to be discussed with health professionals, with psychological professionals, all sorts of people, and however you want to do it. But you don't get to just do an abortion because it's inconvenient, do you? Sorry, not in Jewish law. So, as is usually the case in Judaism, there's place for dialogue. How do we interpret it? And there's clear guidelines. And our rabbis discussed it. See, this is the part that I think is so important. 2,000 years ago, our rabbis discussed this. They had detailed discussion about this. Think about that. And they really thought it through. I mean, I'm presenting to you what they came up with, but imagine if we had to come up with that, how long that would take. How many think this idea of a RODEF is a great idea in terms of using it for abortion? It's a great argument, right? They came up with that, of taking the RODEF and bringing it in. That's their brilliance. I think that's a big part of us to recognize the brilliance of our sages and our ancestors. And as much as anything, to trust each other's intention to do good, to have dialogue, because you may disagree with each other, but you don't have to be disagreeable. Okay? And as long as there's no chasm, it's a lot easier to do that, isn't it? So my prayer for all of us is that we choose not to be disagreeable with each other, but we can passionately argue and still respect each other like Yochanan and Barclay, Yochanan and Resh, and that we really take this argument, this Jewish understanding, and share it with other people. I think it's a lot more sensible. Because whether I believe a soul happens at conception or I believe it only happens at birth, it doesn't matter. Here I can have a real dialogue and not have to say you're evil. I may just think you're wrong. And we can have an honest dialogue and bring peace. Does that make sense to everyone? So any other final questions on this?
I
Yes?
just wanted to make a comment that it seems interesting in the debate now where you have different states that are actually putting their religious views on the whole public of those individual states. Like what'll happen if it goes down. And like in California, it's fairly secular, and let's say in another state, they're primarily Christian, so they're gonna put their religious beliefs on, on the whole population. So
Yeah,
it's really interesting.
which becomes a whole other dialogue. I will tell you that I recently wrote an article about this. How many of you heard of, this is not abortion related? Well, it is, I guess. How many of you heard of what the Archbishop of San Francisco recently did? He condemned Nancy Pelosi, and he said you can no longer accept the communion because you're doing a mortal sin. Now, we don't have mortal sins like that. We don't have that. But I have great respect for him because he said, not from a political point of view, he said, look, your views are your views. And that's fine, but they're antithetical to our religious views. So the communion can only be given with people who do not have sin. So the mortal is the mortal sin. So until you change how you act, you can't come have communion.
Well, it's almost like, let's say in those states where they say it's not going to be legal, that they're making that assumption of when the soul comes in the body, right? And also that they're forcing other people to follow their religious teachings. I'm not saying whether I agree or I disagree with that, but it's, it's a
We don't, that's not where our world is. That's not.
Worse, they'd be, they cry.
And look, remember something else too. Our laws are for us.
Right.
Our laws are for us. Okay? They're not for the non-Jews. Laws, you keep kosher. Okay? Now, if you want to say, well, I don't really want to listen to the understanding, I just want to look at Torah, okay, fine. You still can't eat a pig. Okay? No bacon. But if someone's eating bacon, there's no mitzvah police going around and hitting them because they did. Our laws are for us. And more importantly, so I don't eat bacon, but if I'm with my friend Rob, who is not Jewish, and he's having bacon, it doesn't offend me in the slightest. He's not commanded. I am.
Yeah.
Makes
but
sense?
It's just putting somebody else's beliefs on, like enforcing that on someone else. Yeah, it's an interesting conflict.
And it's a political issue. It becomes politics. And I try and keep those off of this pulpit, other than some interviews, but I try and keep it off the pulpit. And so, again, our laws are for us.
Yeah.
And my belief does not require me to have you believe the same thing.
Yeah.
All right? But I really want to make it clear that for us, abortion is not a political issue. It's a woman's rights issue. With rights in Judaism, responsibility. So my prayer for all of us is that we treat each other with respect. And I hope this was useful, and thank you for coming.
Thank you.